OWASP is a nonprofit that stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. OWASP is a community of developers, technologists, and evangelists improving the security of software through tools and resources. OWASP has 100 plus active projects, and new project applications are submitted weekly. Projects are open source and are built by our community of volunteers, people just like you. Community and networking. There are hundreds of local chapters worldwide and thousands of members. Meetings are free and open to everyone. They include training, talks, and networking opportunities. Education and training. OWASP hosts many events each year. They are a great way to improve your skills, build your professional network, and learn about new trends in the industry. One of the many ways you can get involved is to become a member. The membership benefits include discounts for events and trainings, your own OWASP email address and Google Workspace access, a vote in our OWASP Global Board elections. And recently, OWASP added a brand new member benefit, access to hands-on application security training through the OWASP Secure Flag Open Platform. Join us and become a member today.
Hello and welcome, everyone. This is a talk about OWASP Nettacker and how to use it for Recon and vulnerability scanning. My name is Sam Stepanyan. You can find me on Twitter at SecureStep9. I'm OWASP London chapter leader, as Edmund's already mentioned, and I'm also OWASP Nettacker project co-leader. Few more bits about me. I'm also chairing OWASP chapter committee, which is a committee created by OWASP to help all OWASP chapters to succeed and be helpful, be active. So if you are running an OWASP chapter, or if you are a member of another OWASP chapter all around the world, please do note that there is a committee which is there to help you out. I actually come from a software development background. I'm an ex-developer myself, and I work as an application security consultant in financial services in the city of London. So by all means, I am a defender. So why am I presenting a talk about a tool which consists of two words, network and attacker? So my history with Nettacker is very interesting because I first looked at Nettacker back in 2017. I saw the project appearing in a list of OWASP projects. I tried running it, and I saw a whole bunch of strange words appearing on the screen about scan methods, and I didn't really understand what this is. I didn't really have time to look at it any further, and I just closed it and never looked at it again. So I was really surprised that a year later, I was actually asked to look at it again. It came as a surprise because we got contacted by the project leaders of OWASP Nettacker, and we were asked to go and present this tool at BlackHat Europe 2018 conference. If you don't know, BlackHat conference is a worldwide conference. So of course you have BlackHat Las Vegas, BlackHat USA, but we in London, we have BlackHat Europe, which happens usually every December, and there's also BlackHat Asia, which usually happens in Singapore. So we were asked to present this project, and we knew absolutely nothing. So myself and Dr. Greg Frakos, we got on a Zoom call just like this one with project leaders of Nettacker and said, okay, guys, we can help you out. We know you cannot travel to London for whatever reason, and the presentation is tomorrow. Let's learn this tool so we could present it. So we had to learn this tool overnight. So we absolutely loved it. Once it was explained to us what it is and how it works. And we went to BlackHat and we presented it. And this is what happened. We had a huge crowd of people gathering around our Arsenal booth. at BlackHat Europe in London. There were penetration testers, there were bug bounty hunters, there were security engineers, consultants, we had developers, we had engineers, we had a couple of CISOs in the crowd, and they were all looking at this presentation, and I just couldn't believe it, because suddenly this little tool was probably one of the most popular ones at this international exhibition. So we said, okay, this is great, and I got involved with Nettacker a little bit closer, became a project co-leader, started working with project leaders and with developers, helped to improve the tool a little bit, and said, okay, next year, let's take it to BlackHat Europe again. And this is what happened in 2019. We had even bigger crowd of people. I couldn't really see the end of the hall when I was presenting. It was so busy. So again, people were just looking at this project, and everyone absolutely loved it. So why is this tool causing so many people to investigate it, causing so much interest, and what is so great and unusual about it? So what is it, first of all? So OWASP Nettacker project is an open source software tool, just like all OWASP projects. And it assists with penetration testing by automating information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. The tool is written in Python, so it can be run on anything which can run Python, so Windows, Linux, Mac OS. And it can also be run as a Docker container, so you can really run it on anything you want. A very, very important thing to mention about OWASP Nettacker is Google Summer of Code. So Google Summer of Code, for those of you if you don't know, is an initiative by Google, which is actually a paid internship for students for their summer breaks for students to work on an open source project of their choice. So quite a lot of organizations participate in Google Summer of Code, and OWASP participates every year. And we are actually quite lucky, because OWASP Nettacker was written and enhanced by many students over the past 4 years now, which is absolutely fantastic. And our collaboration with Google and Google Summer of Code is continuing. So if any of you listening right now, if you're a student, or if you know any students, please do let them know that this fantastic initiative exists, and students can apply to Google Summer of Code. Usually application starts around March time, and then once the basically the slots are allocated to different projects, then the students start working on it during the summer break. And so at the end, there is an assessment, and of course, everyone benefits, because open source gets enhancements in the tool, and students get an experience of actually working on a real life software project, working with project leaders as mentors. And it's not just OWASP, there are other organizations like Mozilla participating, and several others. But for OWASP, it's also not just Nettacker. A few other OWASP projects and tools participate in Google Summer of Code. And for example, OWASP Zap and OWASP JewShop are two projects which also, I think, benefited greatly from participating in Google Summer of Code. I think this is very, very important. So please do make note of this fantastic paid internship program. And if you're a student, or if you know any students, please let them know to apply next year. So what is Nettacker? Nettacker is a kind of a Swiss Army knife type of tool. So it is a tool consisting of many tools, just like a Swiss Army knife. And these tools are not necessarily compatible with each other, but can they all be used together? This is an interesting question. So Nettacker is a collection of tools. It has a modular structure. So each module is that Swiss Army knife blade that you can pull out and use. It's easy to create own modules. The modules used to be written in Python, but now we have a brand new version, which makes it even easier. I will talk about this a little bit later. The tool is quite fast performing. It uses Python multi-threading. You can customize how many threads you want to run. The degree of parallelism depends really on how much memory and resources you have available to you. It has something called customizable profiles, which are bundles of modules focused on a specific task. So if you can imagine your Swiss Army knife, you can actually pull out several blades. If you want to achieve a particular task, you can use several tools at the same time. And of course, the greatest advantage of Nettacker is that it is a tool which can be automated. You can run it from the command line, you can run it from your cron job as a schedule, you can run it from your development CI/CD pipelines. That is what makes it great. It's the automation of tasks and the fact that you have all these different modules available to you. A few other notes about Nettacker. It is not officially released yet. We don't have version 1 yet. It's not even in beta kind of quality version. The current versions are 002 and 003. Version 003 is very, very new, so it's just been released. So there's still a few things that we are cleaning up in that version. Because it is an open source project and it's still what OWASP calls an incubator project. So it's a baby project, but it's already very, very good project. But we're always looking for more contributors, just like any open source project. If you can help out and contribute, please do. I will talk about how to contribute at the end of this presentation. So the advantages of Nettacker, it already has a command line interface. You can use it as a CLI command tool for performing your scanning tasks. It has a web UI, it has an API, it has a built-in report generator. It also has Maltego transforms. For those of you who know what Maltego is, it's a great tool which is built into Kali Linux, for example, used for investigations mainly. And it has over 70 modules, so different Swiss Army knife blades. Where can you find Nettacker? So Nettacker can be found on the main OWASP.org website. If you go to owasp.org/www.project-nettacker, you will find it there with a web page containing some of the quick demos and links to things, including documentation. So important thing about documentation is that we're actually using GitHub Wiki. So I don't think many projects on GitHub actually use GitHub's wiki facility. We do, so Nettacker team actually utilizes GitHub Wiki for documentation. So if you just click on the wiki, once you open the project on GitHub, you will find comprehensive documentation available there to you. And that includes installation instructions, which are there. You just need to click on that section to read how to install the tool. So in terms of comparison of Nettacker with some other scanning tools out there, right? A lot of people ask me this question, what's the difference? So if you compare Nettacker with some other well-known tools of the same type, like Burp Suite or OWASP Zap. So Burp Suite or OWASP Zap tools, these are the vulnerability scanners which you usually would scan just one website for many web application vulnerabilities. And that's whatever the scanner is able to find. And usually these tools work by crawling one website that you provided to it as a target. And these tools will try to discover all possible URLs, all the parameters, all the forms, all the buttons, all the links, and these tools will then try to exploit, try to scan for particular vulnerabilities and then generate the report. So OWASP Nettacker works differently. It scans one or many, and that many can be hundreds or can be thousands of IP addresses, networks, or subdomains for what? For open ports and one or more specific vulnerabilities which are listed by the user. And as I mentioned before, you can bundle these specific modules in profiles together, which is absolutely great. So this is the main difference, that Nettacker, and of course the word net for network is a bit of a hint that it is there to attack your network, scan your network. So it scans massive amount of IP address. Of course, you can use it to scan just one website or one IP address, but it is designed to scan many targets. That is what is great. Talking about installing OWASP Nettacker, I'm not going to install it today, even though I will be doing a live demo of the tool. OWASP Nettacker is available on GitHub, and you can just download and install it from GitHub using the installation instructions. I will be using version 002 today because the latest version 003 currently has a couple of issues. However, the latest version has some great features, and I will cover this later. But the installation instructions are available on the wiki. An important thing to mention here is that you need to install dependencies first. So read the manual, read the wiki, because there are some operating system dependencies that you need to install. These are basically libraries for SSL, for Python, some development tools. So you need to make sure that the operating system already has, and there are some libraries for curl and for the database, which you need. But typically to install Nettacker, what you would do, you would just clone it from GitHub, then change your directory to Nettacker, and then use pip tool to install all the Python dependencies from requirements.txt file. I have recorded a video on how to install Nettacker in Kali Linux. Again, that relates to version 002, which is currently the previous version of Nettacker, because we have a brand new version. But I think if you are going to try to install this tool, there is a YouTube video that you can just find and follow the steps there. Another great thing about Nettacker, which happened very, very recently, just less than, I think, 4 weeks ago, we suddenly discovered that a BlackArch Linux, which is a Linux distribution which is specifically designed for penetration testers, included Nettacker in the operating system. And we had no idea. We just discovered it by accident, and very thankful to BlackArch Linux team. And our little tool is now there. If you are using BlackArch Linux, and I include a couple of screenshots here, they have a very nice Hack the Planet theme on BlackArch. You can just install the tool using the standard tool installation utility in BlackArch, and then just type Nettacker, and there you go. You will have version 002 built into BlackArch. So you don't have to install it because it's pre-installed if you install the full version of BlackArch, or if you you have a choice of which tools you want to install at the beginning of the installation of BlackArch, and you can just tick the box which says Nettacker, and you will see a screen like this with all the tools. So these are all the tools starting from N, and you can see Nettacker. Here is using version 002. It is advertised as automated penetration testing framework, and it is bundled with BlackArch automation tools bundle inside BlackArch. So this is really, really great. In terms of Docker, we don't yet have an official OWASP image yet. So we're working with Docker Hub and our OWASP colleagues to get the Docker image to official OWASP Docker repository. I had a sort of a temporary image, which is using the old version. Again, that is now probably out of date. The best way to use Docker with Nettacker is actually once you've got the repository cloned to your local folder, you can just use docker compose up command to spin up the Docker container. It will automatically download and install all the dependencies, and that includes a containerized Linux with a version of Python, and it will start a web UI mod. And I will speak about web UI a little bit later. Before I proceed any further, and I will be doing a live demo later on, I would like to remind everyone of the responsible use of this tool, because OWASP Nettacker is actually an offensive security tool. So please remember that you shouldn't misuse this tool or any other security tool for unauthorized access, and performing security scans without permission from the owner of the computer system is illegal. So what is Nettacker? How can I explain Nettacker so you can understand it and figure out what it is? Remember when I looked at Nettacker originally, there was lots of modules, lots of information on the screen, and I couldn't understand what it is. Nettacker is actually quite a simple tool. it consists of modules, and there are 3 types of modules. There's a module of type scan, for example, port scanner. So these are all the modules which scan for something. It has modules of type vuln, and these are obviously the modules which scan for a particular vulnerability. For example, Apache Struts vuln will be looking for Apache Struts vulnerability. And it has a module, modules of type brute, and that stands for brute forcing. And for example, SSH brute module will try to perform brute forcing using SSH protocol. That's it. So basically 3 types of modules: scan for something, look for a particular vulnerability, or perform brute forcing. That is what Nettacker is in a nutshell. There are quite a lot of Nettacker modules. I'm not going to go through all of them. I've highlighted some of them on this slide. The number of modules is constantly growing. And again, if you would like to contribute one, that would be great. Some of the interesting modules that are highlighted here, for example, admin scan is a module which will perform a scan on the target for a particular folders, usually associated with the administrative consoles. Right, so basically a lot of applications have sort of built-in admin consoles, and Nettacker allows you to kind of scan the target and find if any of these admin control panels are actually installed. Why is it important? Because if it's there, it's quite possible that the users, for example, forgot to change the default credentials, and that would make it easier to for attackers to hack into them. And of course, also probably this is something that you don't want to expose. And if you are scanning your own network, you might want to use configuration on the web server, for example, something like a web application firewall to block external access to these admin consoles. Another interesting scanning tool is CMS detection scan that allows you to detect content management systems which are running on the target. Nettacker works with several content management systems. I will tell you which ones in a minute. Another interesting module is PMA scan. So PMA scan is a module which scans for PHP MyAdmin. So PMA stands for PHP MyAdmin. So PHP MyAdmin is a free and open source tool to manage MySQL databases. This is a very, very popular tool which is installed on maybe hundreds of thousands of websites all around the world. And the problem with it is people usually forget to secure it, or they're running an older version which can be vulnerable or has default credentials, and an attacker helps you discover it very, very quickly. Port scan is, of course, one of the main modules. I will talk about port scanning a little bit later. Another great module that we have is subdomain scan. So subdomain scan is one of the fundamental features of Nettacker because it allows you to enumerate subdomains. There are quite a lot of other open source tools available on the market, and which can perform subdomain scans. And there are lots of guides on how to do subdomain scanning and combine it with other tools to achieve something. But the great thing about Nettacker that subdomain scanning is built into the tool itself, it's built into the core. And a few others is, for example, WAPalyzer scan. WAPalyzer is a great module which allows you to analyze what technologies are running on the target. Is it running Apache, Nginx, IIS? Is it running Python, Ruby on Rails, or PHP? This is everything that WAPalyzer allows you to discover. A few other scanning modules we'll probably talk about them a little bit later. There are lots of vulnerability scanning modules. I'm not going to cover them all. This list is constantly changing. A few interesting ones here to note is, and I will be demoing this these modules. So server version vuln is actually a vulnerability of the web server to leak its version and its identity, what server is it, in a special header, HTTP header called server. That is usually includes server banners. So for example, you can see which version of IIS or Apache or Nginx or whatever is the server technology being used. You can see it there. And again, why is it important? Why? Because if your web server is actually leaking the version, there are specific vulnerabilities which are only applicable to specific versions, and attackers can, for example, by obtaining this information, they can perform reconnaissance on your network saying, aha, these guys are running, for example, I don't know, IS version 7.5. Let's check which vulnerability it has. And then by checking the CVEs, the vulnerabilities, they will be able to attack your system knowing that you're running an older version. Another related module is X powered by vulnerability. So X powered by is another informational header, which some of the web service return, which also provide a bit more information about specific technologies. So for example, for Microsoft IIS service, X powered by header would usually contain things like the version of ASP.NET that it's running. And again, it might be giving out too much because ASP.NET is known to have several vulnerabilities. And once attackers know which version you're running, it will make it easier for them to attempt several exploits. And another great module, which is probably kind of an unsung hero of Nettacker, but the one that I use a lot, is SSL certificate expired vuln. Why is it important? This module allows you to scan your network or all the subdomains of a particular domain, but of course, Nettacker is a network scanner, so I use it to scan networks and networks of my clients and discover expired service with expired SSL certificates. What is wrong with service with expired SSL certificates? Because if your network administrators, if your IT guys do not look after a server and they forget to renew SSL certificate on it, that kind of means that the server is abandoned. So if the server is abandoned, it's not patched. And again, that means it is going to be an easier target for the real attackers. So this is actually a great module to discover all the servers on your network with expired SSL sets. It's also been very useful for me in my bug bounty engagements as well and penetration testing work. And of course, what is another important thing to mention with all the modules and Nettacker, generally that you can run it both inside your network and from outside your network. And that's what makes it great. So even if you don't expose, for example, many servers to the outside world, in your internal network, you might have a bit of a mess and lots of old servers, expired servers, unpatched servers, and OWASP Nettacker is probably one of the first OWASP projects which actually allows you to discover this. And of course, the third type of modules is brute forcing modules. So in version 002 of Nettacker, you can perform brute forcing using several protocols. You can perform brute forcing using FTP, HTTP basic auth, HTTP form brute forcing. That's your usual sort of web screen with username and password on it. HTTP NTLM brute forcing as well. And then standard protocols like SMTP for your mail service. As you know, currently people need to log into the mail service. And if there is no, for example, rate limiting set up on your SMTP service, someone can try all combinations of username and passwords to find credentials which work. Yeah, that's what brute forcing does. SSH brute forcing module, probably the one I use the most, telnet brute forcing, and there's a special brute forcing module for WordPress XML RPC module. So if you don't know, XML RPC is a feature which is enabled in the WordPress content management system by default. And one of the issues with it is that it actually allows to authenticate users to a WordPress API, and it is possible to use brute forcing to find credentials on your WordPress server. And if you use the same credentials on your WordPress as on the network, that means that the attacker can compromise that user account. Okay. About brute forcing, what is very interesting is that OWASP Nettacker was originally called IOT Scan, and it's still its Twitter handle. So that's the original name for Nettacker. And the idea was that you can scan your network for IoT devices. So you can scan your IoT device for open ports and brute brute force scan for default credentials. I actually use Nettacker for one of my clients in the city of London, and I scanned their network where they had lots of web cameras all around their premises because they had lots of offices with lots of cameras, and I performed the brute force scanning using Nettacker to discover that lots of these cameras had default credentials, admin, which means that anyone could have connected to these webcams and actually started watching things that they're not supposed to be watching, because of course you don't want people to connect to cameras inside your offices. But this is what's great about Nettacker, and IOT Scan was the original name, and you can see here the Nettacker's logo, which looks like a little radar here. The main Nettacker module is port scan. So those of you who are familiar with Nmap, for example, Nmap is probably the most popular free port scanner tool out there. A lot of people have kind of love and hate relationship with Nmap. I certainly do, because Nmap can be quite confusing, has quite confusing options. Running it on the network can cause some issues for some people. The results are quite difficult to understand, because it does produce output on XML, for example. So port scanning your network with Nmap can be made much easier if you use Nettacker instead. I believe it's much easier and faster to use Nmap. You can control the speed of it using -T and -M command line switches in Nettacker. That allows you to add more threads and threads per host. As we mentioned, Nettacker uses Python multi-threading. By default, Nettacker port scanner module will scan 1,000 most popular ports. So it's very similar to Nmap. You can, of course, ask it to scan all the available ports, but you can also add a special command line switch -G to scan for specific ports only, for example, ports 80 and 443. Before I proceed with the demo, I will actually tell you how do you run Nettacker, right? So my problem was when I ran Nettacker for the first time, I couldn't understand how to use it. So remember this, to use Nettacker, you need two things too. So you cannot just run it without any parameters and expect it to work and do some magic. You need to provide it with two parameters on the command line. You need to define a target using -I. That's what is it that you are scanning, and -M, which module are you going to use to scan your target with. Now, your target can be, for example, a single IP address, so 192.168.1.149 in this example. And if you want to port scan that IP address, you can just define it like this. If you want to scan the whole network, you can define the target in the CIDR notation with /24. That means all the 255 addresses on the network will be scanned. And actually, Nettacker targets are pretty flexible. What can be a target on Nettacker? It can be a single IP address like this. It can be an IP address range with a start IP address and an end IP address. It can also be a CIDR range, as we previously showed with the /24 or /bits address. You can also define a domain name, and that is what's really good and what's great about Nettacker compared with, for example, Nmap. You can define a domain name, and you can also define a URL, and the URL you can define, for example, with HTTP or HTTPS protocol. But that is not all, because usually if you have a large organization, in that organization, you will have lots of networks. You will have lots of subdomains, right? And how do you squeeze them all into one command line? You don't. What that Nettacker allows you to do, it allows you to put all your networks and all your domains into a text file, and then you can load Nettacker with a text file as a list of targets. That's why there is a command line option called -L. And here you just define a text file which contains the list of targets, basically one target per line. So either that can be IP address range, domain name or whatever we showed you before, a specific URL, and then you define the module on which you want to run it on. So I'm actually going to now switch to the live demo because it's to show you this particular thing that I'm going to use. And that is one of the advantages of Nettacker, that you can combine modules as well. Okay, I'm going to switch to my Kali Linux. So I have Nettacker running in my Kali Linux. So if I run Nettacker with no parameters, remember I did it first time, I just run python nettacker.py in my Nettacker folder, and you can see it spits out a lot of information about usage, lots of things. There's and I'm like, okay, what is all this, right? So as you remember, first time I actually ran out of patience when I was looking at it, but it's actually all very simple. You need to define the M parameter, which is your module, and you can see these are the module names available. So the module names I showed you in the presentation, they're also all listed in the documentation wiki. And one interesting thing is, of course, here for whatever reason, they are not listed alphabetically, which makes it quite difficult to read. However, in the documentation website, they're all listed alphabetically with explanation of what they do. Okay, so let's now try to run Nettacker as it is supposed to be run. We need to define a target using -i parameter. So actually, let me try to do a port scan. I'll try to use this host on my network, 132.176, and I'm going to, it's just a single IP address. I'm going to run it with a port scan module. So let's see what happens. I need to actually check if this running. Yeah, it is running. So there you go. You can see that Nettacker quickly performed a scan on the target and reported to us in this text format that this host actually had the following ports open: 23, 111, 22, 8084, and 1890. And here's another interesting thing that you will notice here, that it actually in the description and put that port 23 is telnet, 111 is Sun RPC, 22 is SSH. But check this out, they're on ports 8084 and 8090. It's actually HTTP server running on these ports. So that means we can actually connect to them using a web browser. So Nettacker has this service recognition functionality. And why is it important? That, for example, here you can see also, well, so this is for the web, right? So you standard website will be running on port 80 or 443, but your administrator can set it up to run on any obscure port. And of course, how do you know you have something running on a strange port, right? You need to perform a port scan. So Nettacker helps you do this. Same thing with SSH. Of course, here it's running on a default port 22, but a lot of system administrators trying to hide SSH service would run it on something else, on port 4222, for example. Yeah, and again, that doesn't stop it from being SSH server, but it's a kind of security through obscurity. Of course, if you use a port scan, you can discover them. So that is how you can perform a port scan. Another interesting thing that I want to show you, which is related to some other modules that you can use. Let's try to run a port scan on OWASP.org. Again, before running it on OWASP.org, we'd like to remind everyone of the responsible use, because this is an offensive security tool. Because OWASP has a bug bounty policy, it allows security researchers to perform vulnerability scans. I'm going to show you examples on OWASP.org, but obviously don't do it on networks on which you, and organizations for which you do not have any permission to scan. Do it on your own network, on your lab, or on a target which is specifically allowing this activity. Okay, so OWASP.org in this case, because of course we understand it's a domain, it's going to try to resolve it and try to scan it. Of course, that is usually not what you would have in real life. When if you run a website, usually websites will not have many ports open. Usually you're probably just going to end up with a standard ports like 80 and 443. Occasionally there are some other ports running on the website, but the point that I want to make here is something different. As you can see, it just came back with just ports 80 and 443. What is great about Nettacker is that we can actually run a port scan not just on this, which is the main name, and of course that resolves to a website's IP address. We can run it on subdomains as well, and I'll show this to you in a second. So let me first show you the subdomain scan feature. So let's run subdomain scan. Okay. So as I mentioned, Nettacker has a built-in subdomain scanner, and you can see how quickly it actually discovered all subdomains of our organization, of OWASP.org that was scanning. You can see it showed it to us again in this format. But what we can do with this information is that we can actually run some other modules with it, so we can chain modules. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run port scan again, and to make it faster, because I'm not really interested in any ports other than port 80 and port 443, I'm going to add the port numbers using -G parameter. So I'm only interested in these two ports. I don't want to scan thousands of ports because I'm only interested in these two ones. But I want to run this port scan on all subdomains of OWASP.org. So this is where Nettacker's feature for subdomain scanning comes up as very, very powerful. And as you can see, Nettacker is already starting to scan all the subdomains and performing port scans on all the discovered subdomains, which is a fantastic feature. And of course, you will not find it in Nmap or any other tool, because you would usually need to combine tools and then figure out what to do with that information, how to glue it all together. There you go. See, that's finished. So we've now just scanned all the OWASP organizations, OWASP.org subdomains, and we discovered all the open ports based on the list that I provided. Of course, if I provide a different list or omitted it, so it's the scan for all the ports, we could perform scan for port scan on all the subdomains. Another interesting feature that I usually do and demonstrate is server version scan. So server version, as I was telling you before, is a module which returns the server banner. And we have another module which also checks for the X powered by vulnerability, which is checking for the X powered by header. And again, if I just run this on OWASP.org without specifying the subdomains, it will just tell me for the one website. So it'll say, okay, OWASP.org returns X powered by as rank sense, and the version vuln on port 80 is Cloudflare, on port 443 is also Cloudflare. So that's it. So basically, it's only done it for one host. However, if I repeat exactly the same command, and I add -S for check subdomains, now the same information is going to be returned for all the subdomains, which is fantastic. So you can imagine we're now scanning the entire organization with all its subdomains for all the all the server types and technologies that it is using. And you can see that some of the subdomains using Atlassian, some of them are using Cloudflare. I think there was one of them which was using Nginx. There you go. There's one which was using Nginx. So this is a fantastic and great feature of Nettacker. But you can see that Nettacker returns the results to us in this ASCII text format. Of course, you can see that this is the command line that you can, for example, automate and you can run on your own domain on your network. So instead of OWASP.org, you can provide your domain, or you can provide -L parameter with a file name where you would load your domain names belonging to your organization, but also IP addresses and IP address ranges. And Nettacker will actually perform the scanning and discover all your assets and all the web service, what is running on this web service, and which ports are open, for example. This is all that you can do and perform this Recon from the command line, which is absolutely great. But in terms of the reporting, right? So you can see here that after the scan is finished, we had this information. It said report saved in this HTML file and the database. So this is very important. So when the attacker performs a scan and it completes that scan, it saves the results in a file. In this case, you can see this is an HTML file, but also database. So Nettacker includes a database and all scans are saved and they are searchable. And I'll show you how to use Web UI to search for the results a little bit later on in this presentation. But first of all, let's have a look what's inside this HTML file. Okay, this is an HTML file, right? So I can probably copy its name and open it in a browser. In Kali Linux, there should be a Firefox web browser pre-installed. Let's start it and let me paste and go and see what is inside this file. And here you can see something magical. So this is our penetration testing graph report. You can see this is the report on the scan that we performed, but in a graphical format. You can see here that the attack has started, and you can see these are all the targets that were attacked. These are, you can see all the subdomains, and you can see in each subdomains, you can see the modules, the Swiss Army knife blades used our modules. So there's a server version vuln and X powered by vuln, and you can see what is running on them, which ports were opened. You also see this username and password. I will cover the username and password a little bit later. The username and password is used if you are using brute forcing. So username and password fields by default are empty. But if you are performing a brute forcing attack and the attacker found a set of credentials, username and password, which actually worked on the target, they will be displayed there. So this is great. So you can look at this graph and you can instantly see some interesting things about it. What is interesting about this graph? And you can see we start the attack, we hit the target, and then it kind of forks because there are hits on two modules, right? Server version on an X powered by module. But if I scroll down, you'll notice the graphically something's wrong about this pattern on this particular target. You will see that OCMS OWASP.org does not have X powered by vulnerability on it. So it does not return X powered by header. It just returns the server version vuln. And you can see that inside it has Atlassian proxy. So this is a very cool feature, having a graph, and I'll talk about different graphs a bit later because there are 3 types of graphs that you can use with Nettacker. And at the bottom of this report, you will find the report in a tabular format. And this is the same what you saw in a text format, but now in a format of HTML table. And you can see all the data here. So this is the result of our scan on OWASP.org and all the results with all the open ports and discovered server versions and technologies used. There is a bit of a visual effect available here. So for example, if I want to bring your attention to a particular row of data, for example, this one, 20th anniversary, a reminder that this Friday we have a 20th anniversary global virtual conference celebrating 20 years of OWASP. We turn 20 years old this Friday. Please do join a free conference, register there. And we have a new subdomain. And look, OWASP Nettacker discovered it because this is a relatively new subdomain. Why it's good, why is subdomain scan is important? Because it actually allows you to discover things that you might not know about necessarily. And some organizations these days, especially those which are using cloud technologies a lot, you might end up with something called shadow IT. So for example, your developers or your administrators, IT guys might be spinning up new virtual machines in the cloud. And how to find out that you have assets in the cloud? You can perform scan based on the subdomain, because of course, as you know, with cloud technologies, the IP addresses are usually dynamic, and you usually don't get them permanently assigned to you, but you can enumerate the assets using your domain name and subdomains, and that's what is great about this particular report. Switching back to my presentation, a few more slides. I'd like to cover these features. So as you've seen, we can actually combine several modules, and as you've seen here, I can perform a port scan and server version vuln in one command line. This is what makes it great. But as you know, there are lots of modules, and how can you use them a little bit more efficiently? So Nettacker has profiles, and profiles are bundles of modules that you can define and use together. There are several Nettacker profiles which are pre-configured, and they come with Nettacker when you install it. It's a profile called info, which is basically all the modules dedicated to information gathering. Profile called scan, which combines all the modules which perform scanning. Profile called brute, which is combining all the brute forcing modules. A profile called vuln for all the vulnerability ones. WP for all the modules focusing on WordPress scanning. Joomla for Joomla content management system. And there's one magical profile called all, which basically says run all modules, everything that we've got in Nettacker, run it on the target. You can just define your profiles using -- profile command line option in Nettacker. If you are going to use all option, there is also a feature to exclude some of the modules, which makes it quite a convenient feature, because usually you don't want to use absolutely everything. You know, for example, if the target doesn't have any FTP, you might want to exclude FTP modules, for example, because there is no point in trying them because there is no FTP server available there. All right, so see, one of the things I showed you during the demo was the fantastic feature of Nettacker graphs. HTML and graphs is the sort of default reports available from Nettacker. However, you can also get reports in not just HTML and text. You can also get reports in JSON and in CSV format. And why is it so great? So JSON format is important because that means that you can integrate Nettacker with other tools, because JSON is a structured data format and any tool can basically consume it and understand it. And of course, what is great about CSV is a format which is very easy understandable to humans, and that's the format which we can load in our favorite IT tool of all times, Excel spreadsheet. So let me show you how we can do this. Let me switch back to the scan that we had here. And of course, we looked at the HTML report. If you want to get a CSV report from your scan, the one that you can open as a spreadsheet, you just define an extra command line switch -o for output, and you provide the name of the file like this, for example, report OWASP. And then if you put .csv as the extension, then you will get the CSV report. If you provide .json, you will get the report in JSON format. And of course, if you provide .html, you will get an HTML one. And if you provide .txt, you will get a text version output report. So this is all very simple. I hope very easy to understand. So let's try CSV. So what is going to happen now? Exactly the same scan that we just performed previously, which is basically enumeration of all subdomains of OWASP.org, connection to all the subdomains on port 40 and on port 80 and 443, and discovering if they have the server version leaking and XPowered by leaking. You can see now something has changed. It says report saved in report -OWASP CSV, and say, okay, interesting. On my Kali Linux here, I have a Libreoffice, which is a free version of Office for Linux operating systems. And it has a calc, which is basically a version, a spreadsheet software, similar to Excel. So let's open the CSV file. It will tell us that it's a CSV file, so it needs to be imported. We'll just accept the defaults, and there you go. Lo and behold, we have a spreadsheet, our favorite thing in the IT world. So in this spreadsheet, you will find some of the columns you've seen before, and you will find one new one called scan ID. Again, the scan ID is a unique identifier of the scan. Why is it needed? Because all scans are saved in the database. So you can see all these hosts that we discovered with all their port numbers and the modules which had vulnerability. These were all a part of one scan. So we can ignore this. But if you look at this, there you go. This is our fantastic Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to delete username and password for now. We have a spreadsheet of all assets of our organization with all the open ports. And what is great about the spreadsheet, of course, is that you can filter it, right? So you can enable data filtering, right? You can sort. But here, for example, if I want to go and say, okay, show me all OWASP assets which have port 80 open, and there you go. I get all my port 80. And then if I say, okay, show me a spreadsheet, can you show me all the assets which are running Atlassian? And say, okay, there you go. Let's just choose Atlassian, and I instantly see all the assets which are running Atlassian. There was one which was running Nginx. Which one was it? There you go. So spreadsheet format makes it very easy for us. And the CSV output is absolutely fantastic because it's a very, very helpful feature. And to be honest, I don't know any other free and open source tool which allows you to perform this kind of task and get the report in CSV. We get a spreadsheet, which is a manager's dream. Well, try asking your penetration testing company for a spreadsheet with all the vulnerabilities and open ports. It's probably going to take them a while to produce one, but you get one for free. And look, OWASP Nettacker is a fantastic tool that you can download and use within minutes. Scan your network and obtain a spreadsheet containing all the assets, all the open ports, all the technologies that are in use, and vulnerabilities, if you have any, and if you import it into the Excel spreadsheet, that makes it easy to use. Why is this important? So there is something called OWASP A0. If you don't know what OWASP A0 is, this was a suggestion by Jeremiah Grossman, our famous application security legend, one of the veterans, pioneers of application security. And back in 2017, he tweeted, he said, I suggest that OWASP Top 10, well, back in the day, it was OWASP Top 10 2017, should include A0 or asset inventory. These days, the biggest AppSec risk are websites you don't know you own. So why is this an issue? Because if you don't know what you own, you cannot possibly secure it. And the asset inventory is probably one of the biggest problems, I think, in most organizations these days. You go and ask them, do you have a list of all your assets? Do you have a list of all your websites? What's running on them? Do you have a list of all the open ports? Most people will just say, we don't know, all right? And Nettacker actually allows you to get that list, get your asset inventory, which is fantastic. Another great thing about Nettacker, of course, I showed you how to use it from the command line, is that it has an API and it has a web UI. You can connect, of course, one way of using Nettacker is you use command line, but it has a web UI and you can basically run it on in a Docker container or in a host on your network, and just connect it using your web browser and ask Nettacker to perform scans for you or search for previous scans. How do you do this? Okay, it's very, very simple. You just need to define --start API parameter to start OWASP Nettacker. When it starts up, you will see this API key because OWASP Nettacker has a built-in Flask web engine. It will actually warn you because it's Flask. Don't use this as a production environment. And by default, it runs on port 5000. Let me show you how this works. Let's switch back to our Kali Linux here. There's my Kali. It should be here. Right, showing the spreadsheet. Let's close the spreadsheet. We already seen its advantages. Now I don't want to save my changes. Okay, back in Nettacker. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run Nettacker with --start API parameter. Something magical happens. Nothing happens. It stops. It says, API key. So this is very important. We need to copy this API key into the clipboard. It says that it's now running on localhost on 127.0.0.1.5.000, and we can just Control-C to quit. Okay, so this is currently a web server mode of Nettacker. Let's connect to it. Let's go to my web browser and start Kali. It's our Firefox, and let's go and connect to 127.0.0.1.5.000. Okay, we get a default warning from Firefox that we're connecting to a website with a self-sign SSL certificate, which is fine, right? If you have your company certificate, you can actually define it in the parameters. The browser is not going to complain. But once you connect, you will get the web UI of Nettacker. You can see there are several buttons here. There's a tutorial, how to use it, and there's some other buttons. But if we click on any of these buttons, we will get an error message saying, please log in first. And how do we log in? We log in using the API key. So that API key that we copied, we can just paste and click on set session. And it says success, your session updated. And now if I click, for example, on the results, you will see all the previous scans that I run are actually shown here with a timestamps, which is absolutely great. So for example, if I was to show you this one, which was our OWASP.org scan, yeah, you will see the same familiar report. There you go, it's here, right? And I can scroll down. So nothing is lost, it's all stored in the database. But what is also great about the web UI is you can actually use it as a search engine. You can Google your scans and you can find what is in them. So for example, remember we saw Atlassian somewhere, so I can just search for Atlassian and it says, oh, there you go. These are the assets which had Atlassian proxy in them. We had Nginx, and I say, okay, what's Nginx? And it will quickly show me what was there. And for every single result, we can get the output in JSON or CSV format as well, which is very, very useful. So it's a kind of, if you're familiar with Shodan, right, which usually does this kind of a search engine for external networks, but you can use it for both externally and internally. So that is because all the scan data is in the database, it is searchable. And that is what's really, really cool. And that's basically the two main features of the web UI. But of course, the coolest feature of web UI that you can perform new scans from it. So you don't have to use command line flags, remember all the switches, you just use this web UI. So in web UI, it's relatively simple. It's a little bit messy, but I will understand why it is so colorful. We define our target. Again, for example, let me define a different target. I'm going to try Uber. Why am I trying Uber? Because Uber is another organization which allows security researchers to scan, and it's has a bug bounty, and it's also being used by a lot of people doing demos in their demonstrations. Uber is a much bigger organization than OWASP, so it will have hundreds and hundreds of subdomains. I just want to show you that the difference between scanning a small organization and a large organization, that it will still work. But here is you can add another target if you want, right? We can add OWASP if we wanted to, but I'm not going to because oops. Well, let me just go back to my Uber. You can see these are the profiles. So you can see we have information gathering, we can say vulnerability scan and brute forcing, and you can see the color coding. So all vulnerability modules are red, right? So if I click on vulnerability profile, they all light up. All the scanning modules are green, they all light up, and all the brute forcing ones are orange, so they all light up. So that is what the profiles do. They just bundle modules together. Again, remember, these are just the default ones. If you're frequently doing scans using a specific combination of modules which you like, you can create your own one. But now, okay, let me perform the same scan that I did on OWASP. I will try to do this on uber.com. So I'm going to take just one, which is server version 1, which is I just want to see which service Uber is running. And I want to use a specific graph. So they can see there are 3 types of graphs available, V2, V1 of a tree, and there's a JIT circle graph, right? Which basically gives you a circular diagram. It can be useful in some cases. Okay, there's an advanced tab here. You can see this is very similar. It's a website. There is no command line tool anymore. And here I can say, please check subdomains when you are scanning the target. And we can change our thread numbers and host threads per number. There's some other parameters like specific port numbers, SOCKS proxy service if we want to use SOCKS, and some extra modules, extra module options as well. So each module can take some other parameters, and if you use command line, you can find them in the usage, but in the web UI they're shown here. And that's basically it. I just want to perform a scan on uber.com using server version vuln, and that's it, and on all subdomains. So once I press the submit button, we will see success request submitted message. That means that this request now went to the Nettacker engine using the API, and we actually have seen a glimpse of that API request, which went to the engine, and Nettacker now starts processing it. And once the scan is completed, we should be able to see it in the results. So basically the results button here, you can see it has like a last updates and reload page, which allows us basically to reload the results and see if there's anything new. But here you can see these are all the previous scans that we have performed. And they all will be shown here. So let me just press reload one more time, see if it's done. No, because Uber is quite big, so it might take a while. But in the meantime, I'll just cover some of the information which is available here on the scan results. Of course, you can see the timestamp here, and you will see it's a funny time zone. That's why it doesn't actually match the current time. We will see what was the report file name. We'll see we actually saved it in CSV. Events number will show us how many rows of data or events, scanning events we had, which ports were used, which category was used, any profile used, scan method. And we can see that this particular scan used X powered by vuln and server version vuln. So there were two modules in use. It didn't use API, right? And the language was English. I recently spoke at OWASP Latin America, and I changed it to Spanish, and people were very happy to see that the report is also available in Spanish language. So this is one of the interesting things about Nettacker. We do try to internationalize it. So all the messages within the tool are available in several languages. So they are reloaded. You can see the results for Uber. They've now arrived, and there are 512 events, which means if I click on this, there will be a spreadsheet with 512 rows, and we can see that we use server version vuln. But there's something different that I want to bring your attention to. You see here it says scan command through the OWASP Nettacker API. So this tells us that this scan was performed through the API, using the web UI, but the previous one had a command line, and this is the actual command line which was used for scanning. So, okay, if I now click on this latest Uber scan, okay, this is absolutely massive. You can see this is all the Uber's externally facing service with all the subdomains and all the port numbers presented as a graph, or you can see them here in the table format. And of course, another great thing about Nettacker, once we've done this, we'll say, okay, let's say I'm an Uber's CISO, and I want to obtain a list of all my externally facing assets using free and open source tool from OWASP called Nettacker. I just click these two boxes, perform a scan, and here I can click on the Get CSV button and download this report as a spreadsheet. And then I can just open it here using Libreoffice. It's going to ask me to import the data, and there you go. Now I have a spreadsheet of all organizational assets with all the subdomains, all the versions. So I can see these guys are running OpenResty, Amazon S3, some Nginxes, something is on GitHub, right? And for a lot of others, they're hiding this, but not everything, right? So for example, we can instantly see some of the Uber's assets which are actually leaking, which technology they are using. All right, in this case, it was Nginx, as Apache, that's Cowboy. So there you go, you can see, even for a very large organization, how quick and easy you can obtain this information. So that's on the web UI. And again, you can, as I said, you can just run this. In this case, it's running on localhost, but you can run it on any IP address. You can run it in the virtual machine, or you can run it at Docker. So basically, if you spin up Nettacker Docker version, you get web UI. That's what you get. And you just need to remember to log into it. And once you spin up your Docker version, you will see this screen and you will see an API key, which is randomly generated for each session. So just remember to copy paste it. There is no currently mechanism for authentication like username and password like other tools. So maybe we will add it in the future. Currently, we're only using the API key, but that still makes it quite useful in an organization. And I know quite a lot of very large financial services organizations in London, in the city of London, which are actually using it, but they're using it running on a dedicated server, and their internal red team is actually using it and for reports. But there's another interesting thing that they are using. Okay, this is just to tell you about that modules. They're using Nettacker with MySQL and with Postgres databases. Nettacker supports enterprise-grade databases as well, if you wish to use them. A couple of interesting slides about the latest vulnerability. If you remember earlier this year, the whole of the cybersecurity world was shaken by Microsoft's Exchange vulnerability. And we know that there was a hacker group called Hafnium, which was attributed to Chinese state, which was exploiting this vulnerability all around the world. And we were actually one of the first few projects to respond, and we created a module for this vulnerability, the CV 2021-2626855. That was the CV number, and this module allowed anyone to scan their network for vulnerable Microsoft Exchange service. Again, why is this important? Because a lot of people don't know what they have. They don't know which assets they're running. And using Nettacker, we were very quick to release this particular module, which allowed people to scan. We even were contacted by some of the smaller European countries, which use them from the country national cybersecurity task force, which scanned the entire IP ranges of the entire country to discover those vulnerable Exchange service. So it's another interesting usage of Nettacker. Some of the Nettacker use cases, as you see, you can use it for asset discovery. You can scan your network for open ports, for hosts. You can also perform scans for default credentials. If we have time permitting, I can show you how to do brute forcing as well. So for example, you can find any hosts on your network which will respond to admin credentials or any other credentials that you can load from a file and perform brute forcing. You can scan your entire network for a specific vulnerability, for example, Microsoft Exchange CVE that I showed before. You can also monitor subdomains and open ports on them. As I showed you, you can scan all the subdomains and the ports. Another interesting one is you can discover expired SSL certificates in your IP ranges. And you can also find subdomains hosting vulnerable versions of WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. This is just some Nettacker use cases for you. Another interesting fact about OWASP Nettacker, which is quite new, we are in the top 10, but not the OWASP top 10 that you usually know. We are in OWASP GitHub top 10. So as you know, OWASP has an organizational account on GitHub, and Nettacker is a part of it. So if you go to github.com/OWASP/Nettacker, you have access to the source code of Nettacker. OWASP organization has about 500 different repositories, I believe. And there's a feature on GitHub called stars. And basically the star is a way for other GitHub users to kind of save a particular project in the list of the starred repos. And usually it indicates that people just bookmark this project so they can follow what's going on with this project later. But GitHub stars is also an easy metric to keep track of and can be used to measure how popular an open source project is. So currently Nettacker is number 10 most popular repository on GitHub for OWASP projects. Number one is not OWASP top 10, surprisingly, but the cheat sheet series. This is the most used and the most bookmarked project on GitHub with 18,000 stars. Then it's a mobile security testing guide, OWASP MS, fantastic project for subdomains discovery. There's a Go security coding guide available here, the web security testing guide of OWASP top 10, of course, developers guide, NodeGoat, and ASVS. These are the top 9, and number 10 in the list of stars is Nettacker with currently 1.3 100 stars, which is fantastic. You can see this list by going to GitHub and looking at the stargazes. So this is what it looks live on GitHub. You can see all the projects here, and you can see that all OWASP repositories here. But we are actually so popular that users now place Nettacker on number 10 in popularity. Another important thing is, as you can see, of course, here is that the version number is different on GitHub. We have a brand new version called 003, and that's been totally re-architected. So instead of using Python modules, we're now using YAML. And the YAML module looks like this. So basically, YAML file contains a definition of the module and contains payloads. So you can define which library to use, the HTTP or socket library, what to send to the target, in what format, which different paths to try to access on the target, using what protocols, what open ports. And when you get the response, what to look for in that response using a regular expression. So once you discover it, you have a hit. That means you've discovered that vulnerability, or you discovered what you were scanning for. This is absolutely fantastic. All the OWASP Nettacker modules from version 002 are now being rewritten in this new format in YAML. We haven't got all of them yet, but we will be getting to them very soon. So let me just quickly cover that we welcome all the contributions. Developers can follow the guidelines here available on the wiki. And please help us with translation, documentation, or Python coding if you know Python. This is it for me. Thank you, and go and attack your network before the real attackers do. I'm now open for Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Sam. This was fantastic, and we have ran over our allotted time, but anyone that has a question, please feel free to ask your question now.
Yeah, do you see any questions on the?
No, there's no questions in the chat window.
Okay, yeah, I think there were some questions about the membership. Just a few things that people usually ask me, and then there's about how frequently we release the modules. And for latest vulnerabilities, I think everyone's usually concerned about this. And I'd like to remind you that this is a free and open source project, and it's entirely powered by volunteers. And we, of course, try to follow the latest and greatest cybersecurity news. And occasionally we do release modules very quickly after a vulnerability is discovered. But because now the format is YAML, which means that the modules can be created very, very quickly. And I think that is the greatest advantage of the new version. We're still working on ironing out some of the problems we had with the new version, because the architecture is different. We will also be changing the web UI and the database, because currently the database in use by default is SQLite, which is of course not an enterprise grade. And because Nettacker multi-threading is causing some of the issues that we are currently seeing. But the plan is for version 004 is to move to NoSQL database, to move to Elasticsearch and Redis databases, which are both in the, sort of enterprise grade ones, and completely change the web UI. So it will look much cleaner, tidier, it will contain more information, and will be more useful for your enterprise use. So it will be an interesting tool from OWASP that free and open source, and people can just download and use. And even today, it allows you to achieve things which are probably only possible with commercial scanners or with a combination of open source tools. But again, you need to have specific knowledge how to usually combine these tools together, and also figure out how to extract data from these tools in a usable format, which can be JSON or CSV, for example, for spreadsheets. And Nettacker allows you to do this today. So I'm very honored to be a co-leader of this project, despite me being an AppSec guy. And I see there's a lot of usage from application security perspective in terms of asset inventory, vulnerability discovery, and the fact that it allows to perform mass scanning in a very simple and intuitive way. Yeah, and I can see some messages from the Nettacker project leader, from Ali, who's just joined us, saying you can actually provide us with your feedback and any feature requests using GitHub by raising an issue or using just the standard feedback available on GitHub. And we will happily respond. Of course, if you speak another language, we currently have quite a few languages already available. Even if we already have a language available, I think we had someone who checked Spanish translation and they said that some of the words needed fixing. We would appreciate, because we want the tool to be international, and the more languages we have, that's great. So you don't have to be a coder to contribute to any of OWASP projects. So you can simply help by providing a translation or by enhancing the documentation. If you're a user of the tool, if you like it, if you enjoy it, and you figured out how it works and the documentation is missing, please go and help us to write documentation, or also just proofread it to make it look professional, because we are aiming for making this project the next great scanner, and hopefully we'll achieve a lab project certification next year.
All right. Thank you again. This was a great presentation. Thank you for the time. Thank you everyone for joining us. Just a last word on our presentation. Just a reminder that next month we have a presentation on IoT by Aaron Guzman. He's also a project leader of IoT scanning for OWASP. And also a reminder that Friday is the 20th anniversary of OWASP presentation. As Sam explained, he's also presenting. So please sign up, and we all hope to see you next time. Thanks again for joining us and hanging out. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.